Hello and welcome to Conscious Living. My name is Marc Caron, and it's another Wednesday here in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm excited again to bring our co-host here, Mr. Stephen Gray, as we air on 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver, as well as on all our social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and other mediums. So thank you very much for joining us. And Stephen, always a pleasure to see you. Obviously, it must be another episode of Spirit Plant Medicine as we get ready for our 13th annual conference.
Yes, and we haven't talked for at least a couple of hours, Mark.
I know, isn't that funny how that works?
That's because it's pedal to the metal time with conference only 2.5 weeks away, less than 2.5 weeks now. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I'm really excited about our guests today because it's an important work that these folks are doing, and I'm always eager to learn and be able to share the work of these great luminaries and what they're doing in the world. So I'm going to hand
Mhm.
it over to you to share your wisdom and introduce our guests today.
Sure. Well, we have two guests with us today. One is Sandor Iron Rope, who will be speaking at the 13th Spirit Plant Medicine Conference coming up November 1st to 3rd in Vancouver and live streamed around the world. And he is joined by Miriam Volat, well, you'll find out a bit more about her in a moment. I'm going to read you a part of Sandor's biography from the website. If you want to know our website, if you want to know more, it's there. And I'm also going to give you a short bio on Miriam. And then we're going to dive into some very interesting discussions. It's going to be pretty open-ended. Going to give them both a chance to extemporize freely, as it were. So, Sandor Iron Rope is a member of the Tetonwan Lakota Oyate, Oglala Lakota spiritual leader from Porcupine District, and enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe, generational peyote practitioner and spiritual leader. In 2006, Sandor served as a delegate for the state of South Dakota to the Native American Church of North America, the NACNA, president of that organization from
Very
2009 to 2012, and then he was president of the same organization from 2012 to 2017. Sandor currently serves as the chairman of the Native American Church of South Dakota. And the other guest we have with us is Miriam Volat, MS. She's an organizer, facilitator, and ecologist with a passion for soils and nutrient cycles. She works nationally and internationally to increase health in all systems. It's her honor to serve as staff director of the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, aka the IPCI, Director of Donor Relationships for the Indigenous Medicine Conversation Fund, Conservation Fund, Conversation Today, and co-director of the River Styx Foundation. And I found out from Miriam just before we began this that the IPCI, what's known in the United States as 501c3 registered charity status. So if anyone would like to support their really valuable work, you can do so. And maybe Miriam can tell us maybe if there's an email or a website to check out later. In any case, we're going to get right into the conversation now. And so um, perhaps it doesn't really matter which one of you take this question, but perhaps we'll start with Sandor if we may. And Sandor, can we ask you, or may I ask you, what is the IPCI and what is its mandate and what is it currently doing?
Um, Thank you, Stephen. The Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, what is it? It's a prayer. It's a generational prayer amongst some of our peyote leadership. It started off as a reconnection endeavor, part of what has been missing in this broken system that I refer to as, the system that we're embedded in, colonized in, um, didn't allow us to really spiritually harvest our medicine. So this prayer has um, rebirthed itself into an organization, and it was supported by the leadership of 4 organizations, the presidents of 4 organizations, NAC, South Dakota, NAC Oklahoma, and Azep and Ahaga of the Nen Nation, formerly NAC of Navajo land. So those 4 leaders had birthed this from the Peyote Research Project that started off with NACNA. So, but it officially had its status and had it born in 2017. So it's really about reconnecting to the land and the spiritual harvest with the medicine.
Oh, cool. So just so that Miriam has a chance to actively participate in the conversation, maybe I'd ask you, Miriam, what specific kinds of activities is the ICPCI engaged in these days?
Well,
oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, as Sandor, who's one of our founding board members, mentioned, our core mission is really reconnecting Native Americans to the responsibility and the rights to be able to have their direct connection with their medicine, and to also ensure that the medicine is available and abundant for future generations. So with that, we have a number of, you could say, strategies that we focus on. And all of the strategies that we focus on began inside of prayers with our board, with their families, with other members of their communities. And then as a staff, like I'm the staff director, our role is then what we do is we do a number of things. We engage with ranchers and develop real relationships with them so that they feel comfortable and have trust in having direct relationships again, which was true in the past with Native Americans, so that youth, families, elders can actually harvest their own medicine. And so that's one of the main things that we do. And in harvesting their own medicine, we call it spiritual and ecological harvest. So they're able to enter the wild peyote habitat. They bring their own elders along to help them understand how to do the spiritual part, how to do the offering part, how to enter in a respectful way into the gardens, how to take what they need. And then on the ecological part, we also are supporting youth and families to understand how to harvest correctly, how to cut, how many to take, what size to take. You know, like one of the big conservation issues is that when people are going and they're buying their money from the DEA certified dealers or buying their medicine, and they're paying money. Money is the driving force. And so that means a lot of little baby medicines are being harvested that really haven't reached maturity yet. And so a lot of what we do is share with people how to take the right ones, the ones that when you cut them properly, they're actually going to regrow and make a family of medicine and be there for their children and grandchildren. So that's really our primary program. And then we're learning more about doing good community engagement, communications. Sandor hosted one of our first youth workshops. We have a big Thanksgiving gathering coming up where people get to have these important conversations, go out into the fields. And so those are really our main programs. We're super excited. We now have a new program manager, and next year we'll actually be initiating our youth programming, where youth will actually get trained to do the assessment, help people do harvests. And there's more. We have a nursery that where we're bringing plants back into over harvested areas so those areas can be regenerated. And yeah, mostly what the staff does is try to implement the prayers of the board and their families. So yeah.
Well, that's heartwarming to hear. Thank you. And regarding what I mentioned at the beginning, can you say what, or I mean, specifically how anyone watching, listening to this could donate to the IPCI?
Oh, sure. We have a website that is IPCI.life, LIFE. And if you go there, there's a donate button. And like Stephen said, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and so it's a tax write-off. And actually what we're fundraising for right now is our Thanksgiving celebration, because what we do is we're supporting folks who don't have the financial means to get to the gardens. This is a time and event.
Is crucial, in my opinion, about the rebalance of this world. We when we're talking about the spirit of plant medicines, and by the way, Stephen and Marc, thank you for the invitation for attending this conference in person. I look forward to meeting you all. But in the essence of world healing, we cannot forget that there is a war happening right now. There is a war that is happening, and we're looking for healing, and everybody is looking for healing. And so part of this initiative of Indigenous people, we know so well the atrocities of our grandparents, and we are survivors of this trauma, best known as historical trauma. And we are learning to identify how this trauma is manifested in our bodies and in our DNA. And it comes out in different forms. And so to really help support our Indigenous communities and tribes, we really have to go back to the old ways of doing things. Spiritual harvested ecological medicine is not new. This is nothing new. This is an old paradigm, has existed since the beginning of how we interact with Ina Makoche, Mother Earth, Wahpe Oyate, the plant life, Wamakashka Oyate, the animal life, and all living things. In Lakota theology, we say Mitakwe Oyase. All things are related. All things are interconnected. You know, there are no bridges to build. The only bridges that need to be built are in the Western frame of mindset that thinks there's bridges. In reality, Indigenous people have already connected and stay connected. But this intrusion of colonialism has infringed upon our way of life. And so this organization is a part of an old paradigm that is our generational responsibility to the next generation to restore this imbalance that was forced upon us. It was forced upon us. So this way of life is the old way of doing things. So really reconnecting is a part of this mental health, that issue that everybody talks about. You know, this therapy is in Mother Earth, but you have to slow down. Everybody's operating at, Mach speed. So you really have to slow down in essence and go back to the seasonal movements of things. So now we're in the fall season. Now we're in the harvest season. Now we're in the Thanksgiving. Now we're in the Indian summer. We're in this season of preparing for the next season. So here we are now going to spiritually harvest our medicine. So the Thanksgiving event is crucial because we were strategizing about how do we reach the youth, because the old folks, everybody's set in their ways, and the real focus is the youth, the next generation. So how do we get to them? So we all had some good brainstorming and happening there. So we decided Thanksgiving is a federal holiday. What more to be thankful for than being able to access the medicine freely, to sustainable programming, to realize what does that mean? What does sustainable practices mean? Because in the old way of doing things, reciprocity is in nature. We understand that, everything comes back, and one thing that I've said always, and is our belief, is that before we even harvest something, Stephen and Marc, we're going to give something. We're going to give an offering, and we're going to make sure that offering is received well to the plant life before we even harvest. So part of giving is the process before we receive. We're going to give something, and then we're going to talk to the medicine, and the medicine forms to this prayer. and we're going to harvest the mature medicine so that the little ones could grow. These practices have been going on quite some time. However, because of this system that we're in, the Controlled Substance Act 1970 formulated all of these, plant medicines in a Schedule 1 for the peyote, right? So these systems in place here kind of serve a couple purposes actually. One is to protect it right now, and thankfully it's protected in that. And thankfully there's exemptions for it. And now thankfully there is also a celebration of the 30th anniversary of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of the amendments of 94 that specifically protect peyote for bona fide indigenous tribes. So here we are giving thanks. And so the focus is in our event. This is the second year that we are planning this event, and we have generated a lot of interest from our youth to start to show them what sustainability looks like, what conservation looks like. So I'll put a comma right there and pass it on to the next person that's going to put a log on the fire.
Well, thank you. That I really appreciate, and I'm sure our viewers will appreciate that worldview perspective that you put on the whole thing. So there's so many things that we could ask you about and you could talk about. One of them that pops up into mind for me is I don't know if this is a term that's used amongst Indigenous people, Native Americans, but the scholars or researchers or whatever you call them have identified peyote as a keystone species. I don't know if you know that term, but they define that as a species of plant or whatever, cactus in this case, of course, that is essential to the cultural life of a nation or a community. And I'm just wondering, in the sort of larger perspective, so to speak, for people that are, in the non-native world for the most part, which is most of our viewers and attendees at the conference, who have been interested in all these different sacred plant medicines like psilocybin and peyote and ayahuasca and all these other ones. Would you say there's, and this is kind of a leading question because I spent 12 years actively involved with the Native American Church myself, and I have the impression that peyote is different from the others. It needs protection in a different kind of a way. So can you speak a little bit, either one of you actually, about this notion of it being a keystone species?
Well, maybe I can kick it off. In Keystone, that idea comes from an arch, right? And in that arch, there's that keystone, which is the stone right at the top of the arch that holds everything together. And if you take that out, then things fall apart. The ecosystem that falls apart, the cultures that are intertwined with that ecosystem can fall apart. Many things are lost. Maybe the other rocks might break when they fall, right? So that idea of keystone, and in an ecosystem or a bioculture or a culture means it's that precious one stone that things are leaning on, right? And so when I hear you say that, just, after 9 years of really supporting the IPCI board and supporting the regeneration and rebalancing of this medicine, it's not just the ecosystem, although that's a lot of work, just right there, the plant itself, but it's also, many different communities in the United States who rely on their relationship and their right to utilize that medicine for their family health in the biggest sense of family health, right? Their mental health, their spiritual health, their physical health, the future of how they're going to go forward. And so anyways, that's what comes up for me with the keystone. And it kind of speaks to the level of importance actually for our whole society. And, one of the things that we talked about last time, Stephen, was this idea that as a whole society, folks who don't have that intertwined history, responsibility, and right could actually step back and support what's happening with Indigenous biocultural peyote conservation, or whatever words we want to put in it. And it's our time to step back. Sometimes people want to jump ahead to like, oh, we all get along and unity and, we all feel good. But actually, there's a lot between here where we are today and that place where we can say, oh, everything's, all fixed and healed up and we can just, do whatever we want. And so, and because this is Keystone, because it's really special, because it's like the medicine of the Indigenous people of this land, like where we live, it behooves us to, like Sandor said before, go slowly, go carefully, really with respect. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sandor, do you have another log to toss on that fire?
In regards to the keystone species,
Or
I'm
anything that triggers you?
anything that triggers me, well, you put on your seatbelt because you're starting to warm up.
Okay, go for it. I'm comfortable.
No, I mean, this whole renaissance here is really I say this with love and compassion. I say this with love and compassion, but this whole renaissance is research oriented, data oriented. But who is that data for? Who is that data for when we're looking at different healing modalities to help heal our communities? But scratch the record. Whatever happened to realize that these plants are biocultural plants in that they're connected to a culture, a tribe, a people, a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And where is that free, prior, informed consent? That's when I'm involved with different conferences, we're always talking about data. We're talking about, oh, wow, these things are healing and look at the statistics and all that. But you know what? Native Americans already knew that. We already knew that. And the feel is like, you have these researchers, quote unquote researchers, and I said it with love. You're going to try to create another wheel, but in reality, there's already a mechanism there with Indigenous people and their ceremonial way of life. But, colonialism has impacted that and said, wait a minute, we're going to civilize you. We're going to Christianize you because you guys are just heathens, pagans. You guys no good. You guys don't know anything. But where are we in 2024? Everybody wants to be Indigenous. All of a sudden, everybody wants to identify as Indigenous people, or a small amount. But the reality is that what is this movement doing? Are we extracting, exploiting these plants without consent of Indigenous people that use them?
Mm-hmm.
Really think about it. Are we going down the same historical timeline as we have as in United States in the lower 48? This country was built upon religious freedom. When you look at the Declaration of Independence, what does that say? What does that say really? And when you look at these folks that were fleeing Great Britain for freedom and actually infringing upon the Indigenous people without really fully understanding them. It's written in Christopher Columbus's logs. How do you view Indigenous people without really understanding them? A balanced ecosystem to commune with nature in such a way that allows harmony and balance. You ever heard these terms of walking the red road and live in harmony and balance? We're far from that today. But as Indigenous people, we understand that. We understand these atrocities that occurred and that these atrocities that are still happening right now. So whatever happened to asking before you take something. Isn't that what we were taught when we were in grade school? We were taught that, I thought. Oh, you should raise your hand. I got a question. Teacher, can I do this? Can I do that? Yeah. I think that's what this educational system first started off with. So when you're looking at these plant medicines that are connected to indigenous tribes, is there an extractive objective? How are we viewing this? You really have to pause and look at what are you doing to these plants, with these plants that are coexisting, that are helping the indigenous people, that are sustaining these plants, these extractive plants. So that's one mechanism of thought. The other is the synthetic component of it. That's a whole nother fire, you might say, because in indigenous people, we do not really understand this synthetic component. However, when you look at synthetics, you get into this heritage molecule aspect. You get into this component of, because one analogy is to look at this medicine. We look at plants as our relatives, okay? We look at plants as our relatives, and specifically this medicine, this peyote, and it's a pan-indigenous movement started from the Comanches that even go further than that to the Huichol people, the Rivadica people. But the Comanches incorporated in such a way that allowed protection for the Native American church in 1918. But it goes further way back down there when you're talking about peyote people, way down there. There's also some Apaches in Old Mexico. So when you look at this movement here, there's a lot to understand plant medicines in that. It's always about nature. It's always about the elements. It's about, communing with Mother Earth. Mother Earth, we have an understanding of breathing. She's moving. This analogy and this therapeutic thought about it. But we don't think about that. We think about, how are we going to move this piece of dirt because we need to build something right here. We need to build something. Move all that away and we're going to build something here. We think like that, So really, if you pause, the synthetic component brings in a whole different paradigm that we don't understand. But we would never clone. I'll use the word clone because that's the thing that the closest term that comes to what I'm trying to convey is you take this molecule and you make that molecule in the lab. It's the same molecule as the natural molecule. We would never clone our mother or our grandparent. We would never clone our grandparent. We would never do that. But then now there's this synthetic component coming in here, and now it's being state certified and used in such a way, And I always caution that because the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, the spirit, indigenous people have been practicing this way from a time immemorial, generation to generation, talking about these medicines and these plants in a spiritual form. And I've been using this medicine my whole life. And so when you're talking about this, we're talking about 50 plus years of experience. 50 plus years of experience. That's just me. My grandparents and everybody else has that extensive experience background. I'm going to use the term experience. And so when you look at experience and you look at that, in light of state board certified curriculum that you were graduated from, et cetera, experience when you're talking about the spirit is best. And there's so many things to say about that because now you're looking at practitioners. Practitioners in the indigenous community would be partaking of that plant medicine along with the patient. When you look at this other healing modality, well, I'm going to give you a pill and it's going to be a synthetic pill. But here you go. Based upon our data and research, this is what you should take here, and we're going to monitor you. But nobody's taking that medicine with the patient. That's one observation. So there's quite a bit to understand when you're talking about the spirit, because you could also hurt somebody if you don't understand what you're doing. Comma.
Okay, thank you. That was brilliant. Well, here's a difficult question for you, I think. I don't know if there is an answer for it, actually, but let me put it this way. The vision that you understand, Sandor, and that many people in Indigenous communities understand, that has been lost by the non-natives for the most part, has been coming for a long time. There are prophecies that go back hundreds of years about this time, and so on and so on. The planet is in a lot of difficulty right now. How, I don't know what the word is, optimistic or confident are you that this essential, you might say, divine truth is spreading and can help change the world? Is it possible? Are you at all optimistic about that?
That's part of my responsibility, is to share this bigger picture. And I don't think everybody will understand it, but there are going to be a few people that really do understand the spiritual nature and the crisis that we're in right now. The rainforest burning, the war that is happening, the issues that are going on, these on a global scale. When you look at these issues here, we have to elevate our spiritual vibration. We have to operate in a different way, because we've been operating this way for these many years. And where are we right now? You look at our leadership on a national level, you look at our leadership on a global level. Where are we? It took this many years to get where we're at right now. How many years is it going to take to reshape our world and our worldview? We've been doing this. If you're going to do the same thing, you're going to get the same thing that you've gotten before. In my thinking is that you have to elevate your spiritual thinking and action, because we can say all these beautiful words and do all these, but you have to put action behind it. And it's really modeling sustainability. It's really modeling this higher vibration and elevated thinking to the spiritual nature of what we're doing with plant medicines.
Thank you. Sandor, are you familiar with the term Wetiko? Apparently it's a Native American term that describes this mind virus that's kind of gotten into everybody, so to speak. I'm just wondering if you knew of the term. Yeah. Miriam, when we had our Zoom conversation a couple of weeks ago, you stressed the importance of this notion of consent. Can you elaborate on that, what that means on the ground?
Yes. So, for example, within the psychedelic boom and the increased interest in a quest for healing of using plant medicines and things, we all know that we have these decriminalization processes that are going on in this municipal, state level. And one of the things that IPCI did early on, and it was initially with the National Council of Native American Churches, was make a request that peyote be left out of those decriminalization efforts. And of course, this was a in the moment, reactive, really quick, like, oh my gosh, this is, like something's happening to the medicine. Of course, the concerns were both for the ecosystem and where the plant lives, but also for the cultural appropriation and all of these things. And so one of the things that I feel like we started to really learn about, and that I personally, with the commitments that I have realized is one of the it's just unequivocally needed, is consent and consultation. And I'm not talking about kind of like some of the kinds of consultation that like an oil company will do, where they kind of like buy off somebody to say it's okay to take the land, and not like that, but true consultative processes. So for example, like if a pharmaceutical company wants to develop mescaline and bring it to market, it should there wants to be, and we have the protocols, we have biodiversity protocols at the UN level. There's a lot of knowledge about this, and there's United Nations agreements in 176 countries about this. If you're going to do that, then you need to, there's many things that you need to do, but one of them is you should support true consultative process. And that what that means is that you slow down enough so that people have time to think, to talk, to pray, to engage on a community scale about what they actually want to do about something, where they stand on something. It's not asking for just a reactive thing. So, for example, if say there was going to be a church for white people that wanted to say that peyote was their sacrament, right? And on a religious basis, they wanted to say that. In my view, and I think in many people and many Indigenous people around the world's view, it would be their responsibility to first make sure that they're talking to Native American people. And that doesn't mean just one organization. It doesn't mean just two. It means many organizations and many communities. And to take the time and the money and the thoughtfulness of who you talk to do it in a really good way, because what it's really about is not doing harm as you look for your own healing. So as you look for your own healing, are you paying attention to how to not do harm in that quest? Are you making it so that rather than going to like greed of your own healing, you're actually thinking about everybody, like everybody? and so consultation, consent is a fundamental part of that. And it can be as simple as making sure there's chicken soup and a little gas money for people to come together, talk to their elders. You know, doesn't have to be complicated, and you let people have their own conversations, and you stretch out your time and your need to do something right now to wait for that to happen, so that it's generative and leads to a real, true community-based response rather than harmful and interrupting things, like interrupting a conservation and responsibility movement within Native communities or whatever it is, right? So I hope I explained myself.
You did, absolutely. Beautiful. Sandor, do you have another log beside you there to toss on the fire on that or any other theme before we turn it over to some questions?
Yeah, I would say that, thank you, Miriam, for the information there. I think that consultation is really a challenge because not one Indigenous organization speaks for peyote per se, not one organization. And when you reflect on how did this federal policy get in place here, it was a collective unification of various tribes, chapters, people to come up with this amendments of 1994, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1994. So, the challenge of that, and the decriminalization issue is, an issue, and I've been at that topic since 2017 when I learned of the decriminalization movement. And decriminalizing gives a false impression that it's legal for everybody. And so really looking at this biocultural plant peyote, it's when you come from a Indigenous background that, for an example, my dad was born in April 1st of 1928. He was a peyote man. And he was also a veteran of the United States Army in the Korean conflict. And my dad journeyed on back to the spirit world in 1977. 1977, he did not get to enjoy religious freedom. American Indian Religious Freedom Act 28. No, not for amendment that specifically, are designed for peyote people. My dad was a peyote man. He believed in that way. He was a strict man, stern man. And I am his legacy to really look at these issues of sustainability and the protection and preservation of our way of life. So, it's a generational responsibility that I believe in, and so the decriminalization of this whole movement, people really have to pause and understand Indigenous tribes here in the lower 48 and to really understand what we're doing. So slowing down is definitely, something that we all should do when we're wanting to not repeat history.
Nice, thank you. Well, before I turn it back to Marc to see if we have 10 participants apparently in the room. I would like to ask one question, Sandor, that's really just, I don't know how many other people would be interested in this, but it's just a personal curiosity. That Native American church that I was involved with, the person the roadman who ran most of those meetings was Ken Littlefish over on the Olympic Peninsula. And he was from your area originally, his people were. He's part Lakota. And he told me that despite what the researchers say, that the peyote medicine came up from Mexico into Texas and surrounding areas, from the Huichol or Wirarica people, and then came up to Oklahoma when when the Yankees were putting people on these reservations and whatnot. He says that Ken told me that, in fact, the peyote has been up in the north, even into Canada, long, long before that. And I don't know if you know anything about that or if it's true. I do know, I've done enough study to know that trade was far more extensive than most white people are aware of among Indigenous peoples in the Americas.
Well, I could say it's possibly so. Every family has their history and everybody has their story. My
Mm,
grandpa Sam Lone Bear was a part of the Buffalo Bill Wild West show, also
really?
a product of Carlisle Indian School. But there was a lot of movement in that time period, a lot of trade and a lot of movement that was happening. Although our tribal people, the Ochate Shakonwi, were putting on reservations at that time, in the 1890s and in that era there. But the medicine was being used. I know that, on our side of the family. So
Mhm.
Mm.
there are a lot of stories around. So everybody has their story.
Mhm. Yeah. So Marc, is anyone looking like they might have a question?
Well, we'll certainly get to that. So, for anybody who is here as part of our audience, if you do have a question, I would ask you to turn your camera on so we can easily find you and bring you into the program. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, I just want to say, in sitting here and listening, I just want to thank you, Sandor and Miriam, for sharing, this wisdom, because you've said some very, very powerful and meaningful information in regards to the medicines. And what I really got from a lot of this in listening is, the importance of slowing down, the
Mm.
importance of consent, the importance of understanding what's going on. And Sandor, you mentioned it a number of times about, the spirit and the spirit of the plants. And this is why I think, with our conferences, we've told it's very different from a lot of these other psychedelic conferences out there, because we focus on the spirit of the plant, and the plant as a totality in that sense. And in, just the things I've learned over the years, the importance of conservation, of appreciation versus appropriation, is something Belinda Araccio had shared with us a couple of years back when Stephen and I had a chance to speak with her. So I just want to thank you for the work you're doing, and, you know, the wisdom that you're sharing, because I think it's certainly important as we see it in, the renaissance that's happening, and the importance to honor and respect and have reverence for the cultures, the plants, the medicines, for each other, and find a way moving forward in a good way to continue to build the bridges that you spoke of in the beginning. So I just want to thank you. And as I sit here and listen and take in the wisdom, as much as I could have many questions myself, you've answered so much already for me. So I just want to again thank you for that. And if we have any questions, please raise your digital hand or turn your camera on. We can bring you in. Um, though I just wanted to share that, and I look forward to meeting you in person and anything you can do, you know, with our platform to help support your work and the preservation and conservation of peyote and you know the information and ways that we can, you know, continue to build these bridges. We're always here for you for that.
Not getting any hands, Mark?
Nope, nope.
Okay, well,
Which
I
is
have a
okay
question.
because, you know, like I say, I every question I had kind of got answered in the conversation, and you know, I think it's important for me at this point to listen. That's part of my slowing down.
Good one. Yeah. Well, maybe there's a little more one of you, Sandor or Miriam, can say about this. You spoke about it early on in our conversation, the work that IPCI is doing, and sounds like amazing, very important work. I'm just wondering, let's see, excuse me. I've heard a number of times that the peyote is endangered and that the peyote fields in Texas, or probably by Texaco, yeah, have been endangered. And so I'm wondering how that's going, and like, are you having much success with the regeneration of the fields?
Sandor. And I just want to clarify one thing. It's not endangered yet. It's not
Ah,
threatened.
okay.
And one of the things that it's all of our jobs to do right now is not have it go on into the threatened status, and I mean into endangered, and definitely not into extinction. And just to give people a little bit of background, north of the Rio Grande, there are some cactologists who estimate that within 15 to 20 years, without really dramatic changes in practices and with preventing some of the things that are happening down here. I'm down here right now. That it could go in extinct north of the Rio Grande in that little bit of time. And so yeah, that's the level of urgency that we're working with. And so it's we don't take this idea of going slowly lightly, because we are in a position of working on something that is extremely urgent while not rushing and being careful and moving you know, behind the kind of the prayer that our, you know, board members and their families hold. And so, you know, I think as far as like people out in the bigger world who aren't, you know, really in this way of life and didn't grow up in it, I think the way that you can help right now is I think you said it, Marc. It's like understanding, respect, and slowing down. So there's actually a lot that can be done. I mean, financial support is always really great because we have leases and gasoline and all of that. But the other thing is to build understanding, and to also understand that using just the Western mind, like Sandor was talking about, where you know, like me, my training in agriculture would be like, well, let's just make a bunch of nurseries and grow a whole bunch of medicine and we can solve this problem like with like agricultural technology, right? But actually what we're doing is something really different, which is being guided by the Indigenous ceremonial leaders, Indigenous ways of doing things, from our governance down to how we make strategy decisions, and with a really firm belief that that's actually what will do the regeneration of this medicine. It has to have the human component in it. Yeah, I don't know if that was helpful. So that, you know, that means, like, for example, our nursery was an incredible 3-year design process our nursery where we can put plants back into the wild over harvested area to regenerate those areas and do transplanting is all designed with culture. Of course, science, and of course, legal, like we have our DEA certification and all of that. But we have nothing that looks like cages. We don't use a greenhouse. We use the plants that are actually already friends and allies of the medicine to create shade for them. And so at every step, we're having to slow down. And are we making a difference? I mean, I'll let Sandor answer that, but but we're learning so much about what is needed here and who is needed here and how. And we just finished 8 years, and so 8 years with the way the medicine grows, it grows in with 5 ribs and then 8 ribs. And so the board like supported a ceremony when we did 8 years, that we're going into this new phase of maturation. So right now is this incredible moment where we've learned a lot about the strategies, and we're ready to implement them at a much greater scale. And so me, just as an individual person, I believe this is going to make a difference, and that 50 years from now, this territory will have rebalanced, where the medicine is abundant and plentiful, and the supply is what Native American church and Native American Peyote people need to support their families and their way of life.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. So it seems the two of you have been so clear and articulate about explaining all this that nobody feels, just like Marc, I feel like they got the questions answered. So seeing none, I'd like to turn it back to you, Sandor, for to wrap it up. Add anything that Miriam was saying, or just some closing remarks, if you would, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. I think part of this is really relearning what Indigenous philosophy is and how to implement that into our practices. So even organizational structure, IPCI is not like a Western nonprofit, or we don't have a president, we don't have a vice president, etc. It's the council format that we want to indigenize our organization, indigenize everything that we do in regards to sustainability, conservation, learning about, this medicine itself is a family and it lives with family. And so supporting this ecosystem and this whole ecology is learning about these families, So is it making a difference? I think progress is progress. And if you don't do something now, you're not going to have a future. So when we talk about generational responsibility, your grandparents thought about you. Your grandparents thought about you. And rest assured, your grandparents prayed for you. They prayed for you to continue to be the person they wanted you to be. Whatever that may be, whatever values, family virtues that you carry, the same way. You have to think like the grandparents did. And 7 generations over the hill, how are my grandchildren going to live? How are they going to be themselves? Same aspect, how we view this prayer right here is a generational responsibility. So in sharing these perspectives, we also have to be mindful of what we share to the world, because it's an extractive world, and intellectual, cultural knowledge needs to be preserved. So it's a balancing act of what we share and how we share things, because intellectual property is a concern. Our language is a concern. Here we are having our younger generation having to pay for a dictionary that was made by elderly people to relearn their own language. So you have these intellectual property issues, cultural knowledge that are really a concern. So really balancing these perspectives, how to coexist and help one another in these challenging times. So I just want to say thank you for our listening audience and each and every one of you for the invitation to come over in person. And, there's something that we could learn from each other across the screen, but we all carry a spiritual energy, a spiritual aura, and we can feel one another. We feel we're emotional beings and we could feel each other in that way. So look forward to greeting you all in that way in these few shortcoming weeks. So
16 days.
You're counting, Stephen.
So was that a period at the end of that sentence, Sandor?
yeah, that was a period right there. Or maybe dot until the conference.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, both of you, actually, for being willing to share the knowledge and wisdom that you have. Very important. And so, Marc, why don't you wrap things up?
Absolutely. Well, again, I want to thank you both for sharing, and it's important that even with 16 days left, I need to slow down as I'm, getting everything ready. Though I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight, and I'm going to be sitting with this for a while because there's a lot to take in, and I just really want to acknowledge the work you're doing. And anything we can do to help and support, we're always here for that. And, for those of you who are listening, wherever you're listening, if you want to learn more, you want to meet Sandor in person, he'll be in Vancouver, November 1st to 3rd in UBC at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. And we'll also be streaming it online in a virtual environment, just like we're in here today in Zoom. And I want to thank everybody for joining us, and Stephen for co-hosting as beautifully as you always do. And until we meet again online, in person, wherever that may be, my lesson for today is to slow down.
Yeah, good.
All right. And I will say, go ahead, Stephen, you had one more thing to say?
I just want to ask Sandor and Miriam or at least Sandor anyway, I have a personal question for you about the logistics of coming to Vancouver that's not relevant for our audience here.
Afterwards, please, so we can wrap up.
I'm just asking him to stay on after we finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the organic nature of these programs.
Yeah.
But so join us, spiritplantmedicine.com. We have a 2-for-1 offer that's still live on our website as well, SPMC 2-for-1. We want it to be affordable and accessible to all people and not have, money be an obstacle for attending and learning and growing and sharing. And we also have a code if you just buy one ticket, CLR, Conscious Living Radio, saves you 35%. And I just want to say again, thank you to our guests. My name is Marc Caron. You've been listening to Conscious Living on 100.5 CFRO FM in Vancouver, Co-op Radio. Thank you so much. And until next time, everyone, take care of each other. Bye for now.